everybody. I'm Gardner Seawright from the University of Utah. I'm here to talk to you about whiteness. In particular, I'm here to talk to you about whiteness in educational relationships. But before we can really dive into that, we need to find some common ground on what whiteness is. And so first and foremost, whiteness needs to be understood as a social system. A historical set of structures, values, norms, and traditions that have been handed down from generation to generation to support white supremacy. And we can see this evolving over time from the transatlantic slave trade through Jim Crow into today, and then has systematically maintained social inequality, economic inequality, and we can see it contemporarily in mass incarceration. We can see it in police violence in communities of color. We can see it in the ever-widening racial wealth gap, and we can see it in the school-to-prison pipeline. Now, the majority of research we have on whiteness and racial inequality is understood from a structural perspective, understood from a systemic perspective that has mapped trends over time. Well, in addition to this structural research, there has been only a little bit of understanding of what are the social aspects of whiteness, the interactional, the relational aspects of whiteness. So that's what I'm going to try and talk to you about today. So I'm coming to this question from the perspective of someone who works with teachers to try and understand the way that race and culture impacts their own teaching in their classrooms. And one of the primary ways that we go about working with teachers to understand whiteness and the impacts of race and culture and inequality in the classroom is trying to push them to develop a critical consciousness. Now, a critical consciousness is this long, drawn-out endeavor where a person is supposed to critically reflect on the racial history of the United States, their relationship to it, and how it might impact their classroom. So this could result in a teacher trying to come to terms with the way that a history textbook might overrepresent Anglo-European history, or even how it not even only overrepresentation of Anglo-European history, but that history serves as a cultural baseline from which everyone else is judged. This also could be seen in the disciplinary practices that a teacher has to deal with, and how our students of color are overly disciplined when compared to white students. Now, this process of coming to a critical consciousness is particularly important for white teachers, especially considering that 80% of our teaching force is still white. So part of this coming to a critical consciousness is dealing with white privilege and trying to question the ways that the social status quo and social norms are still conditioned to white ways of being and a white structure and this white history. So with this in mind, what I'm trying to do here today is consider the actual social aspects in relation to structural inequality and structural oppression as it has existed over time. As a way to try to make this clear, I'm going to share a story from some of the research I've been conducting over the last year, trying to wrap my head around this issue. So let me try and set the scene for you a little bit. This is a 9th grade geography classroom. We're in the classroom with Miss Alexander. She's a passionate and critically trained teacher. She has a working understanding of multicultural education and critical consciousness, or at least working towards it. And we're in the middle of a classroom discussion on renewable resources. And each of the students are in groups of 3 to 4, trying to come up with examples of what renewable resources are. And Miss Alexander is sitting back, giving them time to come up with these examples. She's sitting in the rear of the classroom, propped up on a couple of desks. And as soon as the time is done, she starts to work through the examples systematically and brings in all the students into the classroom conversation. Eventually, she comes to the group that's closest to her. It's a group of 3 students with Melanie, a white female student, Jeremy, a white male student, and Yesenia, a female student of color. She turns to Yesenia for their example. And Yesenia quietly but confidently says, solar energy. As soon as she does this, before Miss Alexander really has a chance to respond, a group of 2 white male students on the other side of the classroom capture the teacher's attention. They're just having their own conversation. And Miss Alexander, like a lot of good teachers, gets them really quiet. Says, hey, stop your chatting. And in response to this admonishment, one of the students, trying to get back into the teacher's good graces, says, oh yeah, solar energy, right? And it really just echoes Yesenia's answer. In response, Miss Alexander pauses for a second, but then just says, yeah, solar energy. Meanwhile, Yesenia turns back into her desk, focuses in on her marker in her hand, and doesn't speak for the rest of the conversation. So how might we understand race in this instance? One of the best ways to really get into how race is written into our everyday interactions, the way that our everyday mundane engagements reflect race and certain types of racial understandings, we have to consider the here and now, the ways that our lived experience is always unfolding to the next moment. And the way that race gets written into this instance, the best example is me here on stage. When you first saw me up here, did any of you really have to say, hey, is that a white guy? Probably not. You probably at least implicitly knew or assumed that I was a white guy. In fact, you didn't have to think about it, because as we're moving through the world, we have a set of taken for granted, pre-reflective understandings of the world. We are moving from moment to moment with a set of understandings that help us understand the situations that we're in. And race is coded into that. And we make these sort of racialized readings like, oh, we codify bodies based on how we have experienced the world in the past. So as we move forward, how do these racialized meanings, these implicit understandings of the world around us, impact our interactions with each other? One helpful way to understand this is to think about our interactions as a social choreography. Like a dance, like dancers that emerge onto a stage with a pre-designed routine and a set of expected interactions with their dancers. We emerge out into the world. We step out onto the street with our own routines, with our own expected interactions and expected routines that are laced with certain amount of racial meanings. So we can see this in the interaction with Yesenia, but we can also see it in many other instances throughout the day. We could see it while we step onto public transit and you see a white man straddling across multiple seats. You can see it in college classrooms when a white male student not only speaks first, but also demands the last comment. So what I'm trying to say here, that within a system of whiteness, within a system of structural racial inequality, our social space is not only designed and oriented in such a way where white bodies are allowed to take space, they are expected to do so. And we can see this especially in this really small interaction in this classroom with Yesenia. It's an interaction that I would call a form of relational imperialism, where Yesenia was projecting herself out into the social space. She was speaking, she was defining the moment in many ways. And not only did these 2 white boys not respect that, they felt as if it was okay for them to just disrupt her and then take her response, and then subsequently push her into a more constricted position where she sinks back down, looks and focuses on her desk and her marker. And she remained quiet for the rest of the conversation. In the same moment, this went completely unnoticed. This was usual. In this way, whiteness is the normative way of being in society. So when I say that the social aspects of whiteness allow white bodies to take space and it is expected of them, that's what I'm talking about. In this way, when we think about the social choreography, it happens with a certain pace, a velocity of what, according to what is usual, how we expect things to unfold throughout the day. So what does this have to do with anti-racist education? What does this have to do with getting teachers to recognize the implications of race and culture in their classroom? First off, it's a reality check. Because just because you come into a classroom with a critical consciousness doesn't mean that you're going to stop white supremacy and stop whiteness in its tracks. It means that we, in addition to a critical consciousness, we need to consider the everyday lived realities of race. So with that in mind, I want to suggest that our pedagogy needs to slow down. We need to hesitate. We need to start to think about ways that we can develop new forms of social choreography, new social habits, new ways of relating to our students. But when we're doing this, and while we're paying attention to the here and now of the classroom, it also forces us to reconcile the potential of anti-racist education. And one of these potentials is the potential for failure. The social choreography and the velocity of whiteness, this everyday momentum, it's real. There's a reason that it's normal. And for our white teachers especially, there's going to be a real strong pull to fall back into that, fall back into the normative choreography. And for most white teachers, I would say that this is inevitable. You're going to fail in the face of anti-racist education. But we can't let that get us down. We have to remember that when we're thinking about the here and now and our everyday experience, that experience is just that. It is an experience that is continuously unfolding. So with that in mind, there's always the possibility for something otherwise. There's always a possibility to create new relationships. And this is exciting for me because while we can recognize failure in one hand, we can also work towards new relationships that are more based in empowerment than violence. And in this way, we can start to develop new choreographies and new ways of relating to our students. Thank you.